Welcome to Mahia Reads. My name is Kiersten Michelle.
And I'm AJ Cerna.
And we are both YA/just general fantasy authors and massive bookworms. Some of us are better bookworms than others.
Yeah. Yep. She mentioned TBR and I was thinking, I'm not that far behind. And then I thought about it and I realized it's June. And I'm not at June numbers right now. But regardless, she did have an idea for like most favorite books of the year. And I was like, I haven't read that many. I've only read like 16 books, maybe 18 to 20 books, depending, because other things that I was reading.
Unpublished books.
Unpublished books. So not a whole lot on my end, but still some fun stuff to talk about. And today, we'll be discussing some of our favorites of the year. It's not necessarily going to be like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. It's essentially the best of a specific category.
Pretty much, I've read 80 books this year.
Are you serious?
And I couldn't just pick my favorite, like top 5, because I just don't work like that. I love most books, and if I don't love a book, I'm usually like, that wasn't for me, and I just move on. So if you ask me my favorite books, I'm like, here's the 40 that I loved. So I came up with like topics to then my favorite or the best in that topic.
Jeez, you've read like 4 times plus the number of books I've read this year.
And it's funny because I'm actually reading pretty slow this year.
Oh my God.
Because I've been writing.
Oh my God.
I also read my own book like 7 times, so I feel like that should count for something.
Yeah.
Okay, anyways. I will start off, I guess. The topic for my first favorite of the year book is the book that I have found the most engaging and read the fastest. And this is probably not going to be a big surprise for a lot of people because BookTube has already been talking about this one a lot, but it's Fourth Wing. Yeah. So Rebecca Yarros, Fourth Wing. I'm not saying that this book is like the best book in the world and has absolutely no flaws. I get some of the criticisms I've heard of it, and I think because of some of the criticisms, like, it is just so quick to read. It's fun. It reminded me of like early Poppy War before Poppy War got real dark, and like Hunger Games. It was just very engaging, very quick read, really fun, and I like the romance. I love the drama. I'm here for it. It was quick. So this is gonna be my fastest, most engaging read of the year, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros.
Mine is not quite a normal book. It is an audio-only experience, and that is Dark One, Forgotten by Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells. If you go, I think it's an Audible original. Essentially, it takes the guise of a podcast where someone is trying to uncover the mystery of somebody who died and was forgotten. And it's a mystery / sci-fi fantasy story, which I think is important to know going into it. Otherwise, your expectations might just be
It's
upended.
not true crime.
It is not true crime. It kind of starts off seeming like it's true crime, but then it's not. It's a fun little experience. It has a full cast of actors who portray it. It's essentially a radio drama, for lack of a better term. I blew through it pretty quickly. It's not long or anything, but it was one of the things where I'm like, all right, I'm going to listen actively at night when we're supposed to be hanging out together because I want to get through it quickly. It didn't help that she had already gotten through it because that's how she works, and she was like, I want to talk about it with somebody, or talk about it with somebody, and
The ending, I was like, I need to talk.
So I blew through that very quickly. It was super fun. Definitely worth your time if you haven't checked it out already. Dark One, Forgotten.
Okay, so next topic is going to be a book that surprised me the most. Not that I thought this book was going to be bad, it's just when I was looking on BookTube and Bookstagram, a lot of people were comparing it to Sarah J. Maas and Thrown in Glass, and I'm not going to lie, those are not my favorite books. I've read a lot of them. They're fine. They're just not my like, oh my god, those are my go-to books. So I was like, sure. I like vampires though. So The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. Yeah, as I said, it's compared a lot to Sarah J. Maas, to Agatar, and Throne of Glass. And I was like, I picked it up because everyone was talking about it. And like I said, I do like vampire books, but I loved it. It was another one of those really fast reads. It was better than I expected. It was better than it needed to be, in all honesty, in terms of I thought the competition pieces were really cool. Some of the twists were cool. Some of the twists like saw coming, but I still appreciated them. But I really appreciated that that book was not what I expected it to be. It was more, and it was just really fun, and I didn't expect that. So that is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. It's also my first book from her, so we will see where I go from there.
Yeah. And for me, the most surprising book I read this year was my best friend's Exorcism. And I think I mentioned this in another video. This was a book that we bought. It had a fun cover. Has some cheesiness in the back. Obviously, it's making fun of, you know, horror 80s type aesthetic. It just looked like a fun little blockbuster type read. And that is what it is. But what I didn't expect was how emotional it was and how connected I would be with the characters in the story, to the point where it just didn't feel like a throwaway popcorn pulp fiction piece. It felt like something that had extra depth to it, that we actually cared about on some level. And by the end, it had a little bittersweet ending to it that kind of resonated with me emotionally and made me a big fan of the author. I know I have a couple other of his books that I still need to check out, but this was the first one I picked up. Like I said, didn't expect to read it right away. Read it a couple months later, and I was like, all right, cool. I'm happy I did that. I'm happy I, quote-unquote, discovered a new author that I would enjoy, and I can't wait for the next one. So, my best friend's Exorcism. And to explain what it is, it literally is about a high schooler, and her best friend has a demon possessed and needs to exorcise her in some way. Pretty self-explanatory. It also has a movie on Amazon, I think, Amazon Prime Video. It's okay. It doesn't really capture the essence of the book very well.
But it cut the worst scene in the book out of the movie, and I appreciated that. And if you've read it, you know what I mean.
Actually, I read it, and I have no idea what you're talking about.
The dog.
Oh, yes. If you're squeamish, the dog dies.
Spoiler.
Spoiler.
Okay. The next one is a book that I wish I had read sooner. So I'm trying to remember when I first bought this, but so it is Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibañez. I think I bought this. It came out in 2020, so at least 2 years ago I think I bought this. It's been sitting on my shelf. I saw it and I was like, ooh, fantasy in a Latino world, that's amazing. I mean, if you haven't heard, we have a book around that whole idea. So I get excited when I see Latino fantasy. So I bought it, and then it just sat on my shelf because I have too many books to read. And the cover was just so pretty, and also I found out the author drew the cover, which I love. So I finally read it. And I'm actually going to explain what this one is about because I feel like the other two are super popular on BookTube. This one less so. But this is a high fantasy world that takes place in, like I said, it is a Latino world, specifically Bolivia fantasy world. And it's kind of about the Incans and the Spanish settlers, I think. Like, it's not direct, you know, one-to-one comparison.
Oh, you're making parallels in your reading.
But
okay.
I'm pretty sure parallels are there. But it is really just a beautiful world, fun read, wonderful magic system. It's a just new creative take on fantasy that I think needs to be appreciated more. So, Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibañez.
So for the book that took me too long to read, I'm going to defend myself because it was for good reason. Because for the longest time, the cover was not for me. The cover was clearly made to appeal to fans of Twilight, and I understand why, but it didn't make me want to read it. And then finally, you read it, and you said it was good. You read it solely because of the cover. So this is a special edition of Cinder, and look at that. Look at that art. It's so cool. It's so cyberpunky. It's very unique, and I think it's very reflective of the story that you ultimately end up getting. This was easy to blow through. It was just like, it had a fun, gritty world. It is inspired by, I guess, the fairy tale princesses that we've heard before. This one specifically Cinderella, and each successive one based on a different quote-unquote princess. And they really build on it from there. And it really just has sort of more of like hints and allusions to it, and Easter eggs slash maybe some basic plot elements, but nothing really crazy. The world itself is on its own. It stands alone very well. And if you're a fan of just fun sci-fantasy adventure stories, this can certainly fit the bill. So Cinder, I waited over a decade from when it first came out. It took a new cover and my wife telling me to read it, to actually read it, and I'm happy that I did. And
now we own the special edition.
Now we own the special edition, and then also I'm in the midst of finishing the final book in the series, so I'll probably be done with that before the end of the month, most likely. We'll see. At my rate, maybe next year.
Okay, so the next one is my new all-time favorite. And this is not to say that, like, a lot of the books I read this year are now all-time favorites, but I think I chose this one because it was an author I'd never heard of, a book I didn't expect to read, and I fell in love. And I've already talked about it a few times, so maybe no surprise. But it is Rebecca Schaeffer's City of Nightmares. It was just so unexpected. I am not an urban fantasy reader. That's just not the kind of fantasy. I tend to read a lot more high fantasy, like Woven in Moonlight status. So when this book came out, I put it on my TBR because I was like, maybe. And then Fairy Loot came out with their edition and I got it from them. And I was like, cool. And then I saw it and I love this edition. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna read it. There's a dinosaur. What can go wrong? Nothing. Nothing can go wrong. Except, you know, in the story, a lot goes wrong. But it's so good. So it is about a world where people, when they dream, if they have a nightmare, they turn into that nightmare. So they have special drugs to stop that from happening so that people don't dream, but sometimes the drugs are not working or they don't have access to them, so people just turn into the monsters. And it's dark and gritty and fun, and there's romance, of course, because it's YA, and I love that. So yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I was just so surprising that it ended up being one of my all-time faves that I wanted to mention it here. So that is City of Nightmares by Rebecca Schaeffer.
And I'm gonna be a picky one here because I don't think I've read an all-time favorite this year, unfortunately, which I think says more about the number of books I've read than anything particularly wrong with the books. I don't think I read anything that I disliked, so nothing on that level, but just nothing that cracked a certain number for me. So
I also get overexcited about every book, so
I'm gonna have to abstain, unfortunately. So I'll abstain from this round and we'll move on to the next one.
So the next one is my favorite book in a genre that I'm not a usual fan of or I don't read a lot of. And that genre ended up being nonfiction. So my favorite nonfiction this year was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I have it on ebook, so I don't have a physical copy. I don't even know what to say about this book. This book was very intense. I am a psychologist in my, I don't know, my other life.
Day job?
Day job.
There you go.
My day job, I'm a psychologist, so reading about mental illness and some narcissistic abuse and eating disorder, and very good book, very triggering and dark if you struggle with those topics, so I definitely suggest being careful about reading it. But I really appreciated the take on it, how she portrayed it. The way she writes is very much from her childhood self telling the story, and so it is not the story of a 20-year-old looking back and going like, wow, that was abusive and not okay. It's from the perspective of a 10-year-old going, well, my mom told me this, so it must be true. And I know a lot of people struggled with that. I really loved it because it just feels very real and makes you realize how easy it is for kids to fall into patterns like that and accept these things as normal when that's all they know. So
I think people have a hard time understanding other perspectives when it comes to that stuff. They're like, oh, well, clearly that's wrong, so it must be wrong. You're not in it. Like, you're not given the same perspective, and that's one of the things that's a pet peeve of mine when it comes to certain readers, where I'm like, they can't look at it from the perspective of either a character or the person who's writing it.
yeah.
I haven't read the book, but you saying that made me remember about all of, like, the criticisms. Oh, this is so problematic, obviously. I'm like, it's obvious to you. All right, next for me, outside of my genre, that is, I guess, contemporary fiction, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure I'd consider it literary. I don't think I would. I think just contemporary, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I don't know if it's her first contemporary story. She did Poppy War and Babel. Babel.
Babel.
However it's pronounced. And So if you're a fan of books, which if you're watching this, you probably are, it takes place sort of in the literary world where upcoming authors are really cutthroat. They're all secretly jealous of each other and secretly hate each other and want each other to fail and to die and to explode into flames. We have a main character whose name is June something, whose last name I forget. But she has always been overshadowed by a friend of hers who really rose up in the literary world. They had some of their books published near around the same time, except her friend really took off. And I actually listened to the audiobook of this book, and so the narrator, they did a good job. They painted a picture in my head. It made me think of Tahani from The Good Place in terms of how her best friend is portrayed, really sort of pompous, and it's like, oh, you know, when things just go right for you, blah, 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 that whole perspective.
Like, oh, they just gave me all that free stuff. That's just so nice. I like when that happens.
And then things go incredibly wrong for her one day when they're hanging out and her friend chokes on a pancake and dies in front of her. And prior to that, she had read an early draft of her next novel. So she secretly takes that. It is a story that is World War I believe Chinese-centric story, and claims it as her own, hence the name Yellowface, where she is a white woman, sort of, I don't want to say she's portraying herself as Asian, but writing about an Asian experience in a controversial way. And it's very interesting. There's a lot of moral quandaries throughout it, a lot of things thinking, is this bad? Is this problematic? Ooh, you could have handled that better. Like a lot of interesting sort of nuances there that are tackled throughout it. Kind of an indictment on the publishing industry as well, and very fun, but very cringe. There are a couple parts in that story where I'm like, oh, I don't want to listen to that, but I'm gonna have to. I'm just gonna wince through the entire experience, and it gets pretty tough to listen to on that level because it's the main character, deeply flawed character in the best way possible. And yeah, so if that sounds up your alley, definitely a great read. I think it's, for lack of a better term, a fun story, and it's my first R.F. Kuang story. I've started reading Babel, so that is the topic of this one. Oh yeah, favorite read outside of a genre.
Okay, and then for the last one, because I couldn't narrow this down to 5, I want to give a shout out to my favorite end to a series that I read this year. And that is going to be, ironically considering he has not finished this, his bookmarks right there. So Winter by Marissa Meyer. So this is not the only series I've finished this year. I actually want to shout out to, I finished The Winners, which is the end of the Beartown series. As much as I love that book, and I will forever love that series, it's not like a through line type of series, so I don't really consider it the best end to a series. Versus Winter, this series I think just had such a fun through line, and this was one of the first series I read through. There was not a single book that slowed me down. This book is, and it's funny, you can't tell in the print because they printed the pages thinner. But this book is way longer than all of the other books.
So this book is actually shorter than this book, but they published thinner pages, so it looks like that one is smaller.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I went back and forth between audiobook and physical book, and I think the audiobook was like 20-something hours.
It's like 24 hours, or
Yeah.
26 hours or something.
And I expected it to take me a while, because I was like, I usually don't binge through the whole series. I usually get burnt out partway through. Like, Way of Kings I love, but I have to take breaks in between the books. I did not take breaks in between these books, and then I got to this book and I was like, I'm probably not gonna read through it. I think I finished it in 3 or 4 days. And I was like, yeah, so...
I'm just gonna fix the bookmark. Go ahead. Continue.
I just think no flaws really in terms of the series. I thought this was a really good wrap up to the series. I feel like all the characters got time. I really appreciate it because I think it's really hard to take a 4-book series about a bunch of different characters, multiple things happening, and really wrap it up solidly, and I think Marissa Myers did it.
Meyer, singular.
Meyer. I almost said, again, Meyer did it amazingly. So, once again, one of my favorites in terms of the end of a series that I read this year. So yeah.
I don't have a favorite end of the series, but I could, maybe it'll be this one, because this will probably be the only series that I finish this year, so Let's just, as a preemptive, this is my favorite ending to a series that I haven't read
I'm not
yet.
puppeting him, I swear.
Anyways, that's it. That's all I have for that because I haven't finished it, so I'm not going to speak to it. I'll let the birds speak to it if you can hear it outside of our house. But that's it for this video. I was going to say episode. It's not quite the same. Video of ours. If you like what you listened to or what you watched, please subscribe. Give this video a like. Help us out with the algorithm of it because we are a brand new channel. And we know it's going to take a while. But if you like us, please like us. Did you like that? That was terrible. Please cut that out. We'll just cut it out here.
Anyways,
Bye.
comment in the comment section what your favorite books of the year are. Because if I haven't read them, maybe I'll read them because I have a lot of books left to read this year. Unlike some people.